Jaya Gopi Jaya Gopi Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. 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 We are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 1, Activities of Mind Priyavrata, and we are doing texts 9 and 10, I believe. Text 9. Tatraha va enam devarshir angsayanena pitaram bhagavantam hiranyagarbham upalabhmanaha sahasai bhutayarhanena sahabta putramyam avahitanjalir upatashe. Translation. Lord Brahma, the father of Narada Muni, is the supreme person within the universe. As soon as Narada saw the great swan, he could understand that Lord Brahma had arrived. Therefore he immediately stood up, along with Swayambhuva Manu and his son Priyavrata, whom Narada was instructing. Then they folded their hands and began to worship Lord Brahma with great respect. Report. As stated in the previous verse, Lord Brahma was accompanied by other demigods, but his specific carrier was the great swan. Therefore, as soon as Narada Muni saw the swan, he could understand that his father, Lord Brahma, who is also known as Hiranyagarbha, was arriving. Thus he immediately stood up with Swayambhuva Manu and his son Priyavrata to receive Lord Brahma and offer him respect. Text 10. Bhagavan api bharata tad upanitarhana Shuktavakena titaram udita gunaganavatara sujaya priyavatam adi purushas tam sadaya asavaloka iti hovacha. Translation. My dear King Parikshit, because Lord Brahma had finally descended from Satyaloka to Bhuloka, Narada Muni, Prince Priyavrata, and Swayambhuva Manu came forward to offer him objects of worship and to praise him in highly qualified language according to their etiquette. At that time, Lord Brahma, the original person of this universe, felt compassion for Priyavrata and, looking upon him with a smiling face, spoke to him as follows. That Lord Brahma descended from Satyaloka to see Priyavrata indicates that the matter was very serious. Narada Muni had come to advise Priyavrata about the value of spiritual life, knowledge, renunciation, and bhakti, and Lord Brahma knew that Narada's instructions were very impressive. Therefore, unless Lord Brahma personally went to Vendamad in the hill to request Priyavrata, Lord Brahma knew that Prince Priyavrata would not accept his father's order. Brahma's purpose was to break Priyavrata's determination. Therefore, Brahma first looked upon Priyavrata with compassion. His smile and compassionate features also indicate that although Brahma would request Priyavrata to accept paths of life, Priyavrata would not be out of touch with devotional service. By the blessings of the Vaishnava, everything is possible. This is described in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu as Kripa Siddhi. or perfection attained simply by the blessings of a superior person. One usually becomes liberated and perfect by executing the regulative principles set down in the Shastras. Nonetheless, many persons have achieved perfection simply by the blessings of a spiritual master, superior. Priyavrata was the grandson of Lord Brahma, and as joking competition sometimes takes place between grandson and grandfather. In this case also, Priyavrata was determined to remain in meditation, whereas Brahma was determined that he ruled the universe. Thus, Lord Brahma's affectionate smile and glance meant, "My dear Priyavrata, you have decided not to accept household life, but I have decided to convince you that you must accept it." Actually, Brahma had come to praise Priyavrata for his high standard of renunciation, austerity, penance, and devotion so that he would not be deviated from devotional service, even though he would accept household life. In this verse, one important word is Shrutavaki by Vedic kings. In the Vedas, there is the following prayer to Lord Brahma: Hiranyagarbha Samavartata Gre Bhuta Sijata Pratireka Asi. Brahma was received with the appropriate Vedic hymns, and because he was welcomed according to the Vedic etiquette, he was very pleased. Om Gyan Timrindasya Kanjana Shalakaya Yakshurunmilitam Jaina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namam Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nami. Namaste Saraswate Devi Gauravani Prachadini Nirvisesha Shunyavadi Ashitya Deshadadini. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Radha Shivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. So we're hearing about a very important discussion that is about to happen, because currently there are no more qualified kings, and therefore a ruler for the world needs to be anointed. I believe after King Vena is killed by the Brahmins, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's after King Vena, then there was no more kings, because there's Maharaj Priyavrata. But on the instructions of Narada Muni, he is going to, he's been doing devotional service, you can say his tapasya, in Gadamandana Hill. And now there's a need for rulers for the world. And first, his father, Swayambhu Manan, has come to try to convince him to accept householder life. But Maharaj Priyavrata, he's taken shelter of Narada Muni, and we know that Narada Muni usually is giving instructions to his disciples to become brahmacharis, to become celibate, and to stay out of the complexities of householder life, or the life of a ruler, in which one has to engage in all kinds of material activities. And so, having had these instructions from Narada Muni, Maharaj Priyavrata has no interest into the life of the king. And so now Lord Brahma has come personally to convince Maharaj Priyavrata that he should come back to the position of a king and enter into family life. And Maharaj Priyavrata, as we know, is a very famous king who ruled for many millions of years. It's mentioned that he ruled for something like 100 million years or something like that. It's a really long time. So Maharaj Priyavata is a very important character, you can say, in this Bhagavatam. And so this is a very important moment in which Lord Brahma has come to convince Maharaj Priyavata to enter back into the house of life, enter into house of life, and to become the king of the entire world. And so it is described here how, as Lord Brahma comes with the determination, the purpose to break Maharaj Priyavata's determination. But Srila Prabhupada is describing here that it is not in an antagonistic type of way. It says, Lord Brahma first looked upon Priyavata with compassion. His smiling, compassionate features also indicated that although Brahma would request Priyavata to accept house of life, Priyavata would not be out of touch with devotional service. So Maharaj Priyavata, in the previous verses, he mentions how he has some doubt as to whether it is possible to engage with the mature energy in such a way as is required for a householder or a king, and not be swayed out of one's devotional service. So he has this doubt that it is not possible. And I think it's a very sound doubt, as we might all have experienced that. Anytime we have some kind of responsibility that requires us to be out in the world, etc., etc., it's very difficult to maintain a strong foundational balance with our material and spiritual activities. And so even for us common folk, we can see how difficult that is. What to speak of being king of the entire world? We can only imagine what kind of responsibility that is. So Maharaj Priyavata's doubts are very sound. And so even the Swayambhuva Manu himself was not able to convince Maharaj Priyavata to break his meditation and come to be assume the position of the king of the world. And so Lord Brahma himself has come. And Lord Brahma, being the grandfather of Maharaj Priyavata, described that he is coming in a very compassionate mood. And also in the commentary, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur also elaborates on this mood, this rasa that is in their relationship of having a kind of joking competition. Srila Prabhupada mentions this briefly here. He says, Priyavata was the grandson of Lord Brahma, and this joking competition sometimes takes place between grandson and grandfather. In this case also, Priyavata was determined to remain in meditation, whereas Brahma was determined that he ruled the universe. And so in the commentary, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, he quotes Lord Brahma saying that you are very stubborn, and I'm also very stubborn. So let's see who wins. That's basically what he's saying. And so I particularly appreciated this point that Srila Prabhupada is speaking about, this Kripa Siddhi. And as we read already, his smile and compassion indicating that Maharaj Priyavata would not be disconnected from his devotional service, although accepting household life. And Srila Prabhupada says, by the blessings of a Vaishnava, everything is possible. One usually becomes liberated and perfect by executing the regulative principles set down in the Shastras. Nonetheless, many persons have achieved perfection simply by the blessings of a spiritual master or superior. So I wanted to try to flesh out this point, because in our own small household lives that most of us will enter into, this principle also applies, that the mercy of the Vaishnavas can protect us. And Krishna says, I provide what you lack and preserve what we have. And in a similar way, the Vaishnavas can help us to preserve our devotional life by their blessings. So I wanted to read from I'll start with this point of discrepacity. This is from chapter 25 of Nectar of Devotion. A person's achieving perfection in devotional service simply by the causeless mercy of the Lord, to a slightly different context, is explained in Srimad Bhagavatam in connection with the Brahmanas and their wives who were engaged in performing yajna, or sacrifice. When the wives of the Brahmanas are favored by Lord Krishna and immediately attain the ecstasy of love of Godhead, their husbands said, "How wonderful it is that although these women have undertaken no reformatory performances, such as accepting the sacred thread, have not resided in the monasteries of the spiritual master, have not observed the strict principles of celibacy, have not undergone any austerities, and have not philosophized upon the observance of ritualistic ceremonies, they still have attained the favor of Krishna, which is aspired after even by great mystics. How wonderful it is that these women have attained such perfection, while we, although Brahmanas who have performed all the reformatory activities, cannot attain to this advanced stage." There is a similar statement by Narada addressed to Sukadeva Goswami. "My dear Sukadeva Goswami, you never took the trouble to reside under the care of a spiritual master, and yet you have attained such a great status of transcendental knowledge. You never took the trouble to undergo severe austerities, and still, how wonderful it is that you have been situated in the most perfect stage of love of Godhead." Sukadeva Goswami and the wives of the Brahmanas performing yajna are vivid examples of devotees who achieve the perfectional stage of devotional service by the grace of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I think this goes to show that the kind of inconceivable nature of these kinds of special mercy, of what can be achieved and what can be experienced by the mercy of the Lord, by the mercy of the Vaishnavas. And so this type of protection that Maharaj Priyavrata is being blessed with by Lord Brahma is very is very powerful, because we can see in the previous with King Vena, who did not have the blessings of the Vaishnavas, and what a tyrant he was, and how much, of course, he was already a nonsense, and so, but we can see the difference between the Vaishnavas and those who did not have the blessings of the Vaishnavas. How much he basically thought he was God, and that everybody had to worship him as God. Whereas Maharaj Priyavrata ruled as a Rajarshi, and he was he was never. It's described also that although he externally seemed to be very involved with his material life, being very enamored by the beauty of his wife, and Srila Prabhupada often gives this analogy of the henpecked husband. But it says that actually he was always completely aware of his real position and his real identity. And we'll hear later on, of course, that at the time when it was time for him to give up and leave behind his duties as a king, then he did that very easily. And so it is mentioned that although during the tenure of his kingly life, he seemed to be engaged and absorbed in so many kinds of material activities, that when it was time to retire again and leave the king behind to his descendants, it is described that all of his spiritual all of his spiritualization, all of his taste, everything was like, it was almost like it was never gone. Srila Prabhupada described that it just came back naturally, automatically. And so to concrete this point that one's devotional life is never gone, especially for one who has the mercy of the Vaishnava, who is acting according to the instructions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then although they may engage in so many kinds of material activities, their devotional service and the benefit that they've accumulated in their practice does never go away. And so we can take some instruction from that. I know for me it was very relatable because, going to trying to find a job and all these kind of things. And I've been thinking about this, like, how do I go and be around devotees for hours and hours and hours and hours every day, and then come back and be, I'm like a really strong devotee. It's just something I haven't done before. Most of the jobs I've had are always with some devotees. Usually means they're not actually real jobs, but this is the first time I'm working with a bunch of people who don't know anything about Krishna. So it's a completely different environment, and you feel whatever lacking you may feel in your Christian consciousness, you feel it more in that environment. It's like becomes acute, that you feel. Just like, say, for example, if you're not a very good swimmer, but you're standing in 2 feet of water, you don't really feel what it's like to be a bad swimmer. But the deeper you go into the water, then you start to feel more, oh, I'm not such a good swimmer. So in a similar way, the environments that we go into that have less and less Krishna consciousness, you feel a little bit more. It pinches a little bit more, oh, I need to be more Krishna conscious. Because once I'm not only in the temple with only devotees, then I can feel, okay, this is how much I need to improve, or go deeper in my remembrance of Krishna. So it's not such an easy thing to be engaged in martial energy and have a strong foundation in our Krishna consciousness. And so while there is also an art to engaging with material energy, this mercy is extremely, extremely important. And so this is another special blessing that we have as Vaishnavas, that we have access to. And so we were reading in the Tattva Sandarbha about how, there's this question of, why do people suffer? Is God what's the word? Indifferent? Is God indifferent to the suffering of the jivas? And Jiva Goswami is saying that the Lord is actually very merciful because He's given the Vedas, He's given the Shastra, and He's given so much knowledge. And through that knowledge, we have our disciplic succession, and through the disciplic succession, we have so many Vaishnavas who are always available to us, whether physically or in the form of their mercy or their writings. And so, whereas in the material world, besides those who have some God consciousness, actually yesterday when I finished my clinicals in the nursing home, there's one lady there who works there, and she came in to just talk to us about what it's like working in that kind of industry, et cetera, et cetera. But she kept making this point of, she kept saying, we should be living a God-centered life. A God-centered life. She was really banging on this point. She was like, every time you come into work, you should think, that I'm working for God. She was very, very passionate about this. And I was like, wow, because I was feeling kind of, oh man, like there's no devotees here. And then she came in and she was just like, and I felt that it was, Krishna was speaking through her. And so you can see that for those who are God consciousness, their experience of having to engage with material energy is already very different. You could see that there were some people there that were kind of dragging their feet. They weren't so interested in being there. That maybe they were just there for the money. But this lady, she was passionate. She was energetic. She wanted to be there, and that was because she had some God consciousness. She was very God conscious. And so the difference between those who have to engage with the material energy separate from awareness of God and His servants can be very, very miserable. Or is very miserable. There's no doubt about that. And as we hear in Bhagavad Gita, that the more that we engage with the material energy, while also wanting the fruits of our activities, the more we become bound in that karma. And the collective uber karma of the modern world is so intense, that just plugging into the gridlock, and we're already getting swept up in so many different kinds of contaminations and influences. It's practically a given, and I guess maybe it depends on where you work, but even then, it's like all kinds of fields of activities are becoming contaminated by the material, um, kind of status quo. That everything is about our own enjoyment, and I need to win against the other person, etc., etc. And so, even in a field like nursing, where you're literally, your job is just to take care of another person. It seems like such a noble thing, but even then, there's stories of people who are taking care of their patient and they're stealing money from them, and like selling their house and buying a car with that money. It's just like, so in every field of activity, there is so much greed and lust and envy that just infiltrates every aspect of our engagement in the material world. And so, while even for someone like Maharaj Priyavata, of course, his engagements as being the king of the whole world is so much like, but at the same time, he was also pure devotee. So he's not affected by the material energy in the same way that we are. But we also have that access to those blessings. We also have the access to those same blessings. So that in such a way we can also do our own work and not have fear of becoming swallowed by the material energy. So I wanted to read some verses from Bhagavad Gita chapter 18, where Srila Prabhupada also elaborates on this point nicely. So we're starting with 56. Though engaged in all kinds of activities, my pure devotee under my protection reaches the eternal imperishable abode by my grace. The word Mad Vyapashaya means under the protection of the Supreme Lord. To be free from material contamination, a pure devotee acts under the direction of the Supreme Lord or his representative, the spiritual master. There is no time limitation for a pure devotee. He is always 24 hours a day, 100% engaged in activities under the direction of the Supreme Lord. To a devotee who is thus engaged in Krishna consciousness, the Lord is very, very kind, in spite of all difficulties. He is eventually placed in the transcendental abode, or Krishna Loka. He is guaranteed entrance there is no doubt about it. In that supreme abode, there is no change. Everything is eternal, imperishable, and full of knowledge. So, while we may not be pure devotees in terms of our advancement in Krishna consciousness, but we can be pure devotees in the sense of following strictly the instructions of the Lord. And by following those instructions, then the Lord is guaranteeing his protection. So in the next verse, 57, in all activities, just depend on me and work always under my protection. In such devotional service, be fully conscious of me. Remember, when one acts in Krishna consciousness, he does not act as the master of the world. Just like a servant, one should act fully under the direction of the Supreme Lord. A servant has no individual independence. He acts only on the order of the master. A servant acting on behalf of the Supreme Master is unaffected by profit and loss. He simply discharges his duty faithfully in terms of the order of the Lord. Now, one may argue that Arjuna was acting under the personal direction of Krishna, but when Krishna is not present, how should one act? If one acts according to the direction of Krishna in this book, as well as under the guidance of the representative of Krishna, then the result will be the same. The Sanskrit word matpara is very important in this verse. It indicates that one has no goal in life, save and except acting in Krishna consciousness just to satisfy Krishna. And while working in that way, one should think of Krishna only. Quote, I have been appointed to discharge this particular duty by Krishna. End quote. While acting in such a way, one naturally has to think of Krishna. This is perfect Krishna consciousness. One should, however, note that after doing something whimsically, he should not offer the result to the Supreme Lord. That sort of duty is not in the devotional service of Krishna consciousness. One should act according to the order of Krishna. This is very important. That order of Krishna comes through disciplic succession from the bona fide spiritual master. Therefore, the spiritual master's order should be taken as the prime duty of life. If one gets a bona fide spiritual master and acts according to his direction, then one's perfection of life in Krishna consciousness is guaranteed. But I like this point that Srila Prabhupada says that if we do something whimsically, that doesn't count. It's not that we do half 50% and then offer it to Krishna and say, I'm doing the order of Krishna, executing the order of Krishna. So he's saying one should follow the instructions also. And the instructions that come through this succession. So we can see how this is happening. The Lord Brahma is coming and giving this instruction to Maharaj Privrata. And Maharaj Privrata, in following those instructions, he is always protected. And his life was perfect. So we'll read the next verse here. I think this one also. Yeah, 58. If you become conscious of me, you will pass over all the obstacles of conditioned life by my grace. If, however, you do not work in such consciousness, but act through false ego, not hearing me, you will be lost. A person in full Krishna consciousness is not unduly anxious about executing the duties of his existence. The foolish cannot understand this great freedom from all anxiety. So in America, it's like, independence and everybody for themselves, and everybody has to do it for themselves. So this is exactly what Srila Prabhupada is talking about. They cannot understand the freedom of that surrender to the instruction of the Lord. And that freedom from the anxiety of thinking ourselves the doer and the receiver of the fruits of all of our activities. Just like I remember yesterday, maybe it was the day before, some of my classmates, it was all about like, how much are we getting paid? And how much money am I going to get? I'm not going to work here, I'm not going to get enough money. Obviously, money is important, but you could see that was like what it was about for them. It was like, how much money am I going to get? So this anxiety of having to be the complete master of our own existence in the material world, I can imagine is very stressful. I know for me it never works. Whenever I think of myself as a doer and the creator of my own happiness, then I always suffer. It's just, that's the way it is. So Srila Prabhupada is saying the foolish cannot understand this great freedom from all anxiety, that if we just surrender to the instruction of the Lord, how much freedom from so much suffering and anxiety that we usually bring on ourselves, we can become free from. For one who acts in Krishna consciousness, Lord Krishna becomes the most intimate friend. He always looks after his friend's comfort, and he gives himself to his friend who is so devotedly engaged, working 24 hours a day to please the Lord. So Krishna, he reciprocates according to how we approach him, right? And I remember thinking, why Krishna is not there for me? Why is Krishna not helping me, etc., etc.? And then at some point, I had to ask myself, well, what am I doing to engender that from Krishna? How much am I following Krishna's instructions? How much more could I be following Krishna's instructions? And if there's room for improvement, then that means something. That maybe we need to be doing more instead of doing the bare minimum and expecting so much from Krishna. So I thought that was an interesting concept of conditioned consciousness, that I do so little, but I expect so much from Krishna. Rather than doing, even if Krishna gives something just little, how much value is in that? Because I'm just an insignificant peon, and Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He's reciprocating with unlimited jiva at the same time. So who am I to expect so much from Krishna if I'm not willing to also follow the instructions of the Lord and do my part in that reciprocal context of my relationship with the Lord? Therefore, no one should be carried away by the false ego of the bodily concept of life. One should not falsely think himself independent of the laws of material nature or free to act. He is already under strict material laws. It's funny. We're already under so many restrictions, but somehow we think we're independent. The other day, I got a little, I don't know what it was. I thought it was maybe a piece of a staple or something. And it was in my foot. And there was two of them, but I didn't know there was, because they were so small. So I got one of them, and I kept feeling this poking in my foot, and it was so uncomfortable. And finally I got it out, and I was just thinking, wow, this tiny little piece of metal is causing me so much discomfort. So in so many ways, we're so limited and we're so susceptible to suffering, but somehow we think that we are free. Or at least I think so. It's quite ridiculous, actually. As soon as he acts in Krishna consciousness, he is liberated, free from the material perplexities. One should note very carefully that one who is not active in Krishna consciousness is losing himself in the material whirlpool. In the ocean of birth and death, no conditioned soul actually knows what is to be done and what is not to be done. But a person who acts in Krishna consciousness is free to act because everything is prompted by Krishna from within and confirmed by the spiritual master. We'll do one last verse, and then maybe we can open it for some discussion. If you do not act according to my direction and do not fight, then you'll be falsely directed. By your nature, you will have to be engaged in warfare. Arjuna was a military man and born of the nature of a Kshatriya. Therefore, his natural duty was to fight. But due to false ego, he was fearing that by killing his teacher, grandfather, and friends, he would incur sinful reactions. Actually, he was considering himself master of his actions, as if he were directing the good and bad results of such work. He forgot that the Supreme Personality of Godhead was present there, instructing him to fight. That is a forgetfulness of the conditioned soul. The Supreme Personality gives directions as to what is good and what is bad, and one simply has to act in Krishna consciousness to attain the perfection of life. No one can ascertain his destiny as the Supreme Lord can. Therefore, the best course is to take direction from the Supreme Lord and act. No one should neglect the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead or the order of the spiritual master, who is the representative of God. One should act unhesitatingly to execute the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That will keep one safe under all circumstances. This makes me reflect on, this our nature. He says, if you don't act according to my direction, you'll be falsely directed. By your nature, you will have to be engaged in warfare. So in a similar way, we have our nature as conditioned souls. And of course, it may manifest to varying degrees according to our samskars or whatever. But we can see that in Krishna consciousness, when you're dealing with Maya, you're either servant of Maya or you're serving Krishna, serving Maya or serving Krishna. We have to constantly always be choosing between Maya and Krishna. sometimes it can be very exhausting. But yeah, our natures will always play out, to the degree that we are not Krishna conscious. I can see that in myself so many times. It's just like, and so if we just take the direction of the Lord, we can be protected from that. It will keep one safe under all circumstances. And so by giving up our attachment to our false independence, we should try to surrender to the instruction of the Lord and have faith that the Lord's protection and the Lord's mercy will afford us a much greater happiness, a much greater safety, as Srila Prabhupada is saying. Because in the material world, we have exposure to so many different kinds of circumstances. And those circumstances, according to our spiritual strength, can affect us in different ways. And so rather than trying to depend on our own strength, of course, we also have to do our own endeavor. Endeavor and mercy is there. Those are two very important things that must go together. But that mercy of the Vaishnavas and of the Lord, through following the instructions of the spiritual master, that will afford us the same kind of protection as we are seeing from Maharaj Privrata in his ruling over the world as a king. And although he was seemingly absorbed in so many different kinds of family activities, he was always under the shelter of the Lord, and when it was time for him to give up family life, he did so very easily and once again entered into his meditation solely on the Supreme Personality of Godhead and giving up all of his duties as a king. So I'll stop there to see if there's any questions or comments or anything you wanted to add to the discussion.
Well, I had a question, but now I just have a reflection because you touched on the question, and I think you hit the nail right on the head. I was going to say, because earlier we were talking about mercy, I was going to say, what would you say to somebody, because we often see this, someone who then just slips into the idea that it's all mercy, and that, oh, well, I guess Krishna doesn't want it. Why isn't Krishna making it happen? And then we just kind of get into this complacent state and do nothing, and it's just kind of like, complacency really not happening. So now I just want to reflect your answer, because I really appreciate your answer, that actually Krishna's already doing so much, and it's really a matter of understanding that I'm not even coming halfway, or even 10% of the way many times. If I look back at my life, there have been plenty of times where I wasn't coming even 10% of the way, I wasn't even doing a little bit. And I was failing to recognize that Krishna was already doing so much in my life. And then even you brought it nicely to this basic point that Krishna is doing so much for everyone, but to speak of for his devotees, because the Vedas are there, everything is established, the devotees are there in the world to help people. So yeah, I really like that answer, and I think it requires a lot of reflection for any individual, that how seriously am I taking my situation, and how much can I actually do? And I'm reminded of a quote by Srila Prabhupada where he said, actually, this is the Mayavadi's way, is to say, oh, God will do everything. God is taking care of everything, it's not have to do anything. And the devotee is thinking, how much can I take off of God's shoulders? How much can I do? Like what? And that's really, I guess that's boils down our whole kind of ethos as devotees, is how may I serve? Not like how can I comfortably fall into the pattern and just kind of be an automaton, but like what can I do?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I really appreciated that. I don't know if you want to go further with that. I thought it was nice.
yeah, I mean, it's like Srila Prabhupada said in that other purport, he said we should not do things whimsically and offer that to the Supreme Lord. I thought that was like such a perfect statement, just like reading into our conditioning. That we just do the bare minimum and then feel bad that Krishna is not reciprocating in the way that we want him to reciprocate. And it's like, I've just been experiencing this so much, which is why it just stood out to me so much reading this passage, because I was just reading this like last week. I finished chapter 2 like yesterday or the day before yesterday of the 5th canto. Mm-hmm. And so it just stood out to me so much reading these purports, and then looking at this purport here from Bhagavad Gita. That following the instructions for two things. One is that following the instructions is where we get the mercy. So following the instructions means following the instructions. Yeah, that's what it means.
It doesn't mean some other thing.
Yeah,
it's to like pretend.
Right. It's pretty straightforward, And the other thing is, this point of freedom from anxiety by surrendering to the Lord, and the more that we're trying to be independent and engaging for our own happiness, the more that we become increasingly bound up in material energy. And that's something that I've also am noticing very starkly, is that it's so much more. Life is so much more hard when we're thinking that we have to do things independently from the Lord. Because we're so flawed and we're so limited in what we are able to achieve or to do. And so it seems like such a simple answer, just do what Krishna wants you to do. But somehow or other we become attached to this idea that, and I think also I was listening to a lecture from Bhakti Srimad about developing our trust in Krishna and how important and crucial that is for our devotional life, to have that trust in Krishna. And so when we turn our faces away from Krishna, when we turn away from Krishna, then we miss out on being able to. It's not that we miss out on the Lord's mercy, because as Vaishnavas, or even aspiring Vaishnavas, the Lord's mercy is always there. But I think more than losing the Lord's mercy, we lose the ability to see the Lord's mercy, and in that way we become enveloped in darkness. Just like in the similar way that our bhakti is never destroyed, of course, unless maybe we make some aparat, but I think there's a deeper discussion on that. But it's like we become covered, that we don't get that access. I was reading somewhere, I don't remember where it was, that if we make offenses to the devotees, then when we are in the association of devotees, we don't get the vision, or we don't get the inspiration that comes from associating with devotees. Yeah. Like you can be around devotees, but you don't feel anything. As you think, these people are just like other people. There's nothing special about them. So I think that's almost worse. It's like being cursed to be unable to see how the Lord is being merciful to you. Yeah. And then you just feel completely alone in that kind of darkness. I think that is almost a worse situation to be in than to just be completely ignorant. And so this is the danger of trying to separate ourselves from Krishna. And so the more we lean into Krishna, leaning into his instructions, leaning into his mercy, or leaning into the instructions of the spiritual master, I think that is then when we start to really feel or really be able to see more easily how the Lord's mercy is playing out in our lives. It seems like there's some comments here. I'm just going to read these real quick. This is from low ground or Madhavi. Really appreciate the analogy about swimming in 10 feet versus deep water. I remember having the opposite experience, coming to the association of devotees, realizing that this was the first time I was above water and could breathe. Yeah, you could put it that way too. To Ujjal's comment, and knowing that I don't make nearly as much effort as is required, remembering how hard Mother Yashoda had to work to tie up Krishna, we have to be prepared to sweat to bind Krishna. Not that we just try once or twice and then, well, why isn't Krishna present in my heart? Yeah. Yes, I think so.
I just had like a quick comment on the point of how at least I myself often fall victim to my circumstances, and I feel complacent in that. Like when I'm here with the devotees, or when I'm in the association of other devotees. I feel really inspired. Yeah, let me be fired up, and then I go back to Chicago, and then I start going to school, and I'm just like, well, there's no association here, and I have so much homework to do, and it's just I fall victim to my circumstances. I was like, oh, there's so much I have to do that, my son slacks off, and I just find myself that I just, and when like quote unquote responsibilities come into my life, I just put Krishna further and further away to the side, and it's just a point that I have to realize that it's not just when it's easy for you, and you're with other people, or you have more time on your hands, that Krishna becomes more prominent in your life. You have to find a way, like Mark Brother, he has so imagine just we have our little life, but just the entire world, like you were saying, to be responsible for, but still he didn't wane in his Krishna consciousness. So I just want to make that point.
Yeah, we we make. Yeah, I was thinking that to your point, that say if we're in a relationship, whether it was romantic or with our parents, and they only showed love to us when it was convenient for them. If they only showed love to us when they had time, or when they had free time, or if they felt like the circumstances were convenient enough for them to do that, we would all be crazy. We would just go nuts. It would be completely miserable. But we do that to Krishna all the time. I've been reflecting on this a lot, just like how badly I treat Krishna. But at the same time, I have so much expectation. I'm like, God, I'm a horrible friend. If you think about it, like, how much dependent we are on the love of the mother. But if she only gave us her attention when it was convenient for her, or when she felt like it, we would all be like completely broken human beings.
Or just dead.
Yeah. Probably that would be
Not
more
really
likely situation. We would probably just be dead. If she only chose to feed us, when she had time, and we all know what it's like for mothers, that their whole life basically is the child. They don't do anything else. Like we were hearing on the podcast the other day, Shaman kind of talking about having sons. And it's like, literally, she's like, oh, I really need to use the bathroom, but he's sleeping, so I'm just going to sit here for 2 hours and hold it. It's like, so we can only imagine what our life would be like if they only gave us that kind of attention. It was convenient for them. We would be most likely dead. And so, it's food for thought. I was hearing this from Maharaj, and just like we don't consider like how we treat Krishna, and that Krishna is a person, and that like I've often heard this example that like when we're chanting, it's like we're calling out to Krishna. So it's like Krishna comes, and we're just like, oh, sorry, I wasn't actually I was actually looking at Facebook, but I just like called you an accident because I'm trying to get through my rounds.
Was that sincere? Dude, I don't have to listen.
So it's like, yeah, we don't. It's something to think about. It's and I was having a discussion with one devotee, and I was saying, I had the realization that, and I was saying, I think that because my understanding of God, of Krishna, is that he's completely independent, he's all powerful, he's self-satisfied, then I feel like I don't need to, like he's not affected by me chanting it attentively or so. And I was like, well, isn't that kind of impersonal? That you kind of, I don't know how to word it, but does that make sense? Like, it's like, because God is God, then it doesn't matter how I treat him. He's all powerful, he's so satisfied. So if I think of Krishna as being mean to me or Krishna as being cruel to me, it doesn't affect him because he's God. And in one sense, it's true. But at the same time, it's like, as Vaishnavas and trying to develop our personal relationship with Krishna, it seems like, I don't know, what do you think about that?
Well, I would think I think it's just like, well, the thing that comes to my mind immediately would be Yayatamam Prabhadyante.
Yeah.
So when we, if we try to think of it like that, like it's not that God's being mean, he's being indifferent because you're being indifferent.
Right.
If I'm being indifferent, then, if someone's indifferent to you, you're going to be like, okay, yeah, I don't have time for you either. That's fine if that's how you want it.
Right.
And then the thing that's sweet for me is understanding that because as devotees we've gotten some mercy, that now God isn't indifferent. And actually he's behind the scenes doing a lot more. And you brought this up. He's already doing so much for the jivas in this world in a general way. The Vedas, incarnations to reestablish Dharma, sitting as the super soul and like literally facilitating everything that they desire if they're qualified to have it. But for the devotees, there's this more sweet thing going on in the background. And actually, that's where it requires an understanding of what God actually is. Because if he's just this self-satisfied guy sitting there and doesn't need anyone or anything, then yeah, it could feel like, well, I don't really matter. He'll get along fine without me. But as for the view of the Bhagavatam, God has this really deep desire to have reciprocations with his devotees. He says to Durvasa Muni, I don't want to enjoy any of my opulences or anything. I can't enjoy them without my devotees. So that's like, when we get that understanding, then we can see the opportunity that we have, Like my guru has given me something, an opportunity for something. And that, I don't want to speak for too long, but that leads me to something I was thinking about when you were talking earlier about surrender, because you brought up the Bhagavad Gita and, what it means to surrender to Krishna. And oftentimes we think of surrender in terms of like, all right, now I don't have to do anything. I'm surrendered. Now Krishna can take it from here. I've given up all of the things and Krishna will do it. But what does surrender really mean? Surrender really means to use my agency for the purpose of somebody else, to serve. And so in that light, I've just gotten such an opportunity to enter into that realm of reality. And it's up to me to understand it and actually want to be there. And then that's what I was thinking. So when you surrender, then you realize it's not on my terms anymore. Mercy means it's not on my terms. Mercy means that I'm actually going to move when mercy gets exposed, when I get exposed to mercy. Not that like mercy means you're now going to do what I want, because that wouldn't be mercy, and I also wouldn't be surrendered. So if I'm surrendered, then it's like if Krishna gives me an opportunity, I'm going to be like foaming at the mouth waiting for it. And if I'm not doing that, then I need to introspect why.
Yeah.
Why am I ready to jump? Why am I still absorbed? Why am I still thinking, oh, that's not how I wanted it, Krishna? You gave it, but that's not, kind of like, come on, can't you do it this way? And then I think if I look at myself, that's the kind of way I've been chasing my tail around in the world, is like setting an expectation and then thinking this is the avenue the mercy should come through. And then when it doesn't, I say, Krishna's not giving me any mercy. I'm waiting. Where's the mercy? But it's coming through every other avenue. But I'm just sitting there waiting for what my expectation is, and that means I'm not surrendered at all. It means I've just like taken that word, redefined it, and said, yes, look how surrendered I am. And then it becomes this manipulative way for me to just kind of pretend that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Anyway, big tangent, but I don't know if you have anything on that.
Yeah, I appreciate a lot what you said about using all of our agency. And I was reminded of just funny how we see these parallels like in the mature world, but for some reason we don't think Christian deserves that kind of endeavor. You know, like for example, like in the movies, it's like, you know, some guy's daughter gets kidnapped and he like follows her across the world, does all these like superhuman, you know, kills 100 guys and just does all these like fantastic things, you know, pushing his body to the limit, you know, for this girl or his daughter or his wife or whatever. And we're just like, well, you know, I'm tired today, so sorry, Krishna. You know, I just don't have the energy for you.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, and it's not that Krishna is like, you know, it's just ironic because the more that we get closer to Krishna, the more mercy that we get and the more we actually become happy. So it's not even like, you know, some kind of like, you know, dictatorship or whatever, you know, it's like, you know, it's like counterintuitive. It's like the more that we lean into Krishna, the more we become happy and more situated in our original position. So there can be only more and more mercy to be had, more and more auspicious, more and more happiness, etc., you know, ad infinitum. So I just thought that was an interesting. So I like that point, but using all of them. So it's like similarly, going back to this kind of mother analogy, how much tolerance, how much patience, how much, you know, waking up multiple times during the middle of the night. It's just like you're really pushing your body and your mind to the limit of what it's capable of. So in a similar way, you know, the devotees who inspire us most, I think we can all agree that they show that example of really using all of their time and all of their ability in the service of the Lord, and we can see practically how they have become transformed, how they become advanced and ultimately perfect in their devotional service. Yeah. I'll just read this comment here. This is from Monday. About mothers, my husband and I have often realized this, that we wouldn't tend to our kids and they probably would be dead out of our negligence if they didn't cry so much. So not only in the way that we love Krishna, but also in the way that he is strong to respond to us. Srila Prabhupada says we have to cry, Yeah. Yeah, that we have to, the more that we go deeper into our meditation in Krishna, you know, the deeper into our chanting, the more that Krishna takes notice of us.
Do we have time?
This can be the last one.
Okay, any help understanding the separation that seems to be there between being Krishna conscious and performing our material duties? Like you mentioned with Kim Priya brought to that. He has to perform his duties, and thanks to his previous Krishna conscious, he was able to finish Dana and then go back to being Krishna conscious. So this separation that is there, I want to understand and also try to see if there is a way that we can perform, if there's a way that one can perform his material duties while being Krishna conscious and know having this separation and saying, okay, I do some austerities while I'm Krishna conscious, then I go work, get contaminated, and then go back and do some spiritual activities. There is a point where we can say, you know, that there's no difference. I go do material activities and at the same time I'm Krishna conscious.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no point that I have to separate them. Can you talk about that?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that, in Krishna says, do your activities for me. So I think firstly it can come to the type of consciousness that we carry into our material activities. So if we, it's kind of like, Krishna consciousness is very much a way of life. From the start of the day to the end of the day, everything we do has some kind of effect. And so I'm still learning this myself, but just from my observation of my own role models and devotees who I've taken inspiration and instruction from, is that they live their life in such a way that it is not difficult to see their work as their duty to Krishna. They're taking care of their family or whatever it is. They don't. My observation is that they don't see it as something material. And this is something I've been trying to improve, and this is what I've also heard from my mentors. They say that it's not. We don't always have to see it as this is my material life and this is my spiritual life. When we have this understanding that acting for Krishna and not being attached to the fruits, then that is Krishna consciousness, and we can become extricated from the contaminations and entanglements, and so and I think it's also a question of faith. And it's kind of like a leap of faith, I'm finding for myself is going into the work life and the workforce. And I remember having a conversation with Deva, and he was saying, Krishna will take care of you. Don't be afraid that Krishna's going to leave you behind because you're going to work a job, And he also said, like, we won't let you go far away. And that gave me a lot of solace. So there's two things. One is the consciousness in which we think about that work. And if we're trying to constantly remind ourselves and maintain that meditation that this is my duty and I'm doing this for Krishna. And I'm offering the results of what I'm doing to Krishna. And, and then association is that we keep association with devotees. And I've seen the difference practically when I was in New York. There are devotees who work their jobs and they would come to the Bhakti Center every day. And there are some devotees who work their jobs and you never see them. And there's a difference in the quality of their spiritual life. That they prioritize the association with devotees, and so they're able to maintain their Krishna consciousness. Whereas those who don't prioritize the association of devotees, especially in a place like New York, it's only a matter of time before they just disappear. So I think that is also crucial, is that even if we're not living in the temple, we have if we can prioritize associating with the devotees, and maybe that also requires, trying to organize our whatever work life in such a way as best as we can to maximize how much time we can get with our association with devotees and our association with Krishna through our sadhana, hearing and chanting. And so it's a matter of priority and having that proper perspective of what it is that we're doing. If we think I'm just going out in the material world and I'm going to get contaminated, then maybe it could happen. Whereas if we approach it with a different perspective of thinking, I have some duty to perform, and I'm conscious that Krishna is always with me, etc., etc. In so many ways, we can know Krishna in whatever activities that we're doing. Then it's definitely possible. I've seen it many, many times, so I know that it's possible. And so I think association, our consciousness or perspective, and having that faith that Krishna will be with us. As soon as we lose that faith that Krishna is with us, it doesn't mean that Krishna leaves us, but we will forget. And, Paramatma is always in the heart. Krishna is always available. But when we choose not to acknowledge Krishna's presence out of lack of faith or whatever kinds of tricks the mind is playing on us, then that is when that is an unfortunate position to be in. So I think that's what comes to mind for me. That's helpful.
Yeah. I just want to add something about from the that we read a lot from the from the scripture from Srimad Bhagavatam. At some point, devotees, advanced devotees, they will at some point will leave everything behind and they will go and and meditate. So that there is this need that one separate everything, any interaction with material energy to fully become, Krishna conscious. So then, then I've seen some devotees like pure devotees, like Prabhupada, that they don't need to do such an activity. So I'm trying to understand in which circumstance, we say, okay, I need to leave everything behind, and fully meditate, and, being Krishna, focus on being Krishna conscious. Or, in which circumstance one can say, I'm fully Krishna conscious, I don't have to give up everything because, I see everything in Krishna. So that there is no need for separation. I guess it looks like it's more advanced instead of conscious. I'm just trying to kind of, how difficult it is to, I guess, interact with the material energy that one has to, separate from it, that there's no way that you can do it otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is that, for us, particularly as followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we're not so much shooting for just retiring from everything in the world and being exclusively Krishna conscious. Our mission is to spread Krishna consciousness all over the world. Now, of course, there are, we can see that there are those who, they go to Vrindavan and they live in Vrindavan for the rest of their lives and like that. Like one of my friends, close friends, he's a senior devotee. He's 75 or something. And maybe like a year or two ago, he retired and he went to Vrindavan. But he was 75 and he spent a lot of years as temple president, doing this, doing that sort of. So I think, and even then, he's writing books, and he's actively engaged. So I think one is that we should have some guidance in some form, because I think for most of us, we're not quite ready to have that kinds of samadhi of giving up everything and being exclusively Krishna conscious. We have to introspect and see where we're at. Like for myself, for example, I would love to just go back to Vrindavan and do kirtan for the rest of my life. But it's not a reality because it's not in my nature. So while I may stay there for 6 months, a year, and be happy, at some point my nature will kick back in and say, hey, actually, this is not really where you belong. So although I would love to do that, but it's not in my nature to be a brahmachari, at least like in that way, And so for me, then I have to find out in what context, what is the best way for me to do my duty and also maintain my Krishna consciousness in the best way possible. So I think that, because our mission is to preach, then we shouldn't shy away from engaging with the material world. Obviously, we can try to do it in such a way as to minimize our contamination, so to speak, And so we have to be real about our capacity and our limitations. But I think that having association is probably one of the most important things, because then we're able to have those who are close to us to be able to support us in finding out what is the best way to move forward for ourselves. That is also the spiritual masters there also to guide us in the right direction. Because also, if we prematurely renounce everything, when we're not ready to do that, then that also can end up, and we've seen that many times in our movement of this kind of premature renunciation, and then we, enter into some renounced state of life, but we're not actually ready for it, and our material desires catch up with us, and then that becomes a difficult situation. Yeah, it's hard for me to say because I'm only 27. I don't know what it's like to be at the end of my material activities. I'm just starting. It's just kind of daunting, but yeah. So the only thing I can say is that we just have to introspect and acknowledge where we're at. Like for example, this devotee who he just moved to Vrindavan, he was retired. He was done with his family life, but at the same time, he wasn't completely ready for that kind of renounced life. Like he needed to have his own room. Like he didn't like, people walking down the hallways. Like he just wasn't ready for the austere life. But he was still kind of done with the material life. So it was kind of like this awkward phase. And so having that association of devotees around to kind of figure out what's the next thing, I think was very helpful for him. So that's, I guess, the most important thing that comes to mind is just in whichever position we're in and whatever phase we are, or if we're trying to figure out what is next for us, staying in the association of devotees is the most important thing for making that transition or whatever direction we're needing to go in a kind of safest way. And it doesn't necessarily mean living in the temple. Like for me, I don't plan on living in the temple for much longer. So then it's also a matter of finding out what is the best way to find the direction that I'm going in. And so while doing that, I definitely prioritize staying in the association of devotees so that I can make that transition. I don't know if anybody else has something to add.
That's good.
We can discuss later too. I think now we should have.
All right.
Thank you everyone for joining. Hare Krishna. Raj Bhagavatam ki
Jai.
Srila Prabhupada ki
Jai.